vaping products in all the shops. What I'll try and do is briefly give an overview about the about vaping itself, and also some of the things that we know about harms and what we can do if we really do want to quit, what measures we can take to try and quit, and also what the government is actually doing in relation to vaping, in relation to regulation, in relation to trying to get our young people to stop vaping, because this is a growing trend which is getting worse year by year. So vaping just involves using a product that contains a liquid which is then heated up, and that creates a vapor, and that allows you to inhale the products included in that liquid straight into your lungs, and that's the process of vaping itself. Now, the main harms that we know about in relation to vaping are twofold. Number one is never smokers, so these are people who have never smoked in their lives, using vaping and becoming addicted to it. So that's a new addiction in a person who otherwise would not have had an addiction had vaping not been in existence. So that's one problem. And the other problem is the long-term effects. And we don't know yet about the long-term effects. In relation to the regulations are quite limited, and also they are very easy to circumvent. So there are a couple of laws in place at this moment in time that regulates all vaping products. But as you'll see in a short while, it's not really followed that strictly, and it's not really enforced. The current concern for our community is that there are lots of young people, so these are people aged between 11 and 18, who are starting to vape. And these are people who may have started smoking, but instead they're vaping. And they also include people who would never have smoked, but because vaping is much more easy to access and also has been promoted as something that's not as risky, they are starting to vape. It is also something that's widely promoted on social media, and this is something that is becoming increasingly widespread in our communities. Uh, they're seeing others doing it, and as a result, they want to give it a try. And before they know it, they become addicted. And this is a growing trend in our communities, and that's something that we need to try and work on. When it comes to quitting, there's a 5-step plan that I have, which, if you follow it strictly with sincerity, it's likely that you'll be able to quit vaping, and you won't need to go back to it, or you're unlikely to relapse. And that 5-step plan is that, number one, there has to be a very clear intention. The person themselves, not the father, not the brother, not the sister, the person themselves, they have to want to quit vaping. So that's the first step. The second step is that it's best to use the actual product itself to withdraw from it, rather than switching to something else and trying to use that. So use the vaping product itself to gradually reduce over a period of time. Number three is keeping good company. The commonest reason why young people vape is because they want to give it a try. Why? Because they've seen others do it either on social media or in their own company. So keeping good company, and ideally someone within that good company who's like somebody that you can respect and be in awe of, who can then supervise that reduction plan. Number four is friends and family support. Without friends and family support, it becomes much more difficult. If you're trying to go it alone, I've seen people with addiction problems, and where friends and family are very supportive, they're much more likely to be able to go through that process where they can actually withdraw from it. And number five is making lots of dua, giving sadaqah, increasing our ibadah, and these things will allow us to gain nearness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that is something that is very often overlooked in these matters. Dua is extremely powerful, and it's something that we don't regard as highly as it ought to be regarded. With the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is easily possible to quit any addiction. So we start off with coming to what we know about the harms. Now, there have been many reports, mainly from the United States, where there have been outbreaks of a condition called EVALI, which is a type of lung injury associated with vaping products. Now, that was found to be only related to products which were counterfeit, which had much higher levels of nicotine, and also had added substances, including THC, which is the active ingredient in cannabis. So these were products that weren't really regulated, And so EVALI is really associated with those kind of products and not with the standard regulated vaping products. There were also things like popcorn lung, but there's not real good evidence at this moment in time to support that. So at this moment in time, the only thing that we know of in relation to short-term harm is in people who suffer with asthma or other lung conditions already, and they react to some of the products. So that does happen, but it can happen in any other setting. So that's the only thing that we really do know. However, the one thing that remains unknown is the long-term effects, and also being addicted to a substance is generally not a good thing. Being addicted to a substance means it's much more likely that you'll develop addictive properties, and it may mean that um, you could quit vaping and then maybe become addicted to something else. Just the general nature of being addicted to something is not good for our psychology. It's not good socially, and it can potentially lead to a physical dependence that can last many decades. And like we said, we don't really know what the long-term harms are yet. We'll only find out in about 15 to 20 years, and by that time it might be a little bit too late. So there's two main regulations in relation to vaping. The first one is tobacco and related products regulation, which was a law that was enacted in 2016, and that's the purpose of that law was to ensure that there's minimum standards in relation to vaping products, and also it was to ensure that information is provided to consumers so that they can make better informed choices. And thirdly, I would argue most importantly, there were measures in place to ensure that children do not become dependent on vaping. That was one of the things that was enacted in that regulation. So, in relation to the actual specifics, the tank within the vaping product can't be more than 2 mils. The strength cannot be more than 2%, the nicotine strength, so that's 20 milligrams per mil. And also, any refill that you have here can't be more than 10 mils. There's also things which, in relation to the packaging, where it says it has to be tamper, child friendly, and sort of resistant to tampering, and also resistant to children. But if you think about it, are there any 11-year-old children that can't open packaging that's designed for adults? It doesn't happen. So that's easy to overcome. There's also new labelings and warnings, and also all products that are sold have to be registered with the MHRA, which is the Medicine and Healthcare Products Regulation Authority, before being sold. This is the same organization that regulates medicines. So it's meant to be really formal, and everything's meant to be above board, all written down and clear. But as you'll see, it doesn't always happen that way. There's another type of there's another law, which is a general law in relation to general product safety regulations. That's for products, vaping products that do not contain nicotine. It's the nicotine products that really are the more dangerous ones, but there's also vaping products that don't contain any nicotine, and they've got more lax laws in relation to that. So why is it that the laws are not very strict? Why is it that there's so much freedom within the law? And the reason is because the UK government has a policy that has been in place since 2019, where they want to make the entire country smoke free by 2030. And their definition of smoke free is less than 5% of the population. It's not 100% clear, but less than 5% of the population smoking means that we are now officially smoke free. So that's the aim and that's the target. And what they've said as well is that we really want to use vaping among smokers as a means to get people off smoking. So what they want is that let's replace smoking with vaping, because vaping is known to be less harmful. And that way we can say that we've achieved our aim of becoming smoke free by 2030. So the Public Health England, which was a body that's now been disbanded, it produced a report in 2015 that stated that vaping is 95% less harmful, and that is likely to be true based on expert evidence. But again, like I mentioned, it doesn't talk about the long-term effects because we just don't know. And it stood by its report in 2018, but now it no longer exists. So there's two other organizations, but they've not really mentioned anything in relation to vaping. So when it comes to vaping and young people, the official line is that it's illegal to sell any vaping products to under 18s. That's the case. But as you'll see, it's very easy to still sell to young people as things stand at the moment. There's actually a loophole that allows any free sample products, vaping products, to be given to anyone of any age. So you could actually give a vaping sample product to a 5-year-old and you won't be breaking the law. That actually is in existence right now. Since 2020, there have been no surveys to ensure that people are following the law. In other words, you could pop into a newsagent, you could pop into a supermarket and buy a vape product. If they decide to sell it to you, nobody's going to check up on you. Nobody's going to check up on the supermarkets or the newsagents. Just yesterday, the government announced that they were now going to start checking on this, and they made a big announcement out of it, despite the fact that since 2016, they were meant to have been checking it all the time anyway. They just stopped doing it from COVID since 2020. They haven't done it until now. And they made a big deal out of saying that, we're now going to tackle vaping amongst young people by enforcing the law as it stands, which they should have been doing all along, but they haven't been doing. There was a survey in Scotland which found that most products that were actually not notified. So, in other words, they were not registered. Most of the vaping products that were sold, many of them were actually above 2% nicotine. So, in other words, you're taking a puff and you're taking much more nicotine than what is allowed by law. And there were lots and lots of places which were selling to young people, actually selling officially openly. They were just selling to young people. So that was just a brief report. And what you'll find is that, as you can see, you can go anywhere in any street, anywhere, and you'll find that there'll be young people that are vaping in certain areas. And where did they get the vaping products from? They would have just walked in and bought it from the shop. So there was a Action on Smoking for Health do surveys annually, and they do a specific youth survey. So their 2022 survey, which is the latest survey available, looks at data from 2021 and before. And what they found is that smoking rates have generally gone down a little bit. So over the last 3 years that records are present, it's 7%, 4%, and 6%. So what happened during COVID, the rates actually went a little bit lower, but that was because of COVID in 2020. But then it's gone back up to what would have been the expected level. So it's currently at about 6%. But that's not including 2022 and 2023 because we don't have data yet for those years. Vaping was at 5% 5 years ago. Then it went down to 4%, and now it's gone up to 9%. It's probably much higher, and it wouldn't be um, far from the truth if we were to predict that there's probably about 1 in 6 people or 1 in 7 people, young people, who are actually vaping at the moment. The overall nicotine use, including smoking and vaping, was around 8% in 2015. It went down to about 6% a few years ago, and it's now currently at 11%, probably a little bit higher if the vaping rates have continued to increase. Now, what they mentioned as well is that 98% who had never smoked had also not used any vaping products. But if you look at the vaping rates of 9% overall, yeah, that means that roughly about 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 of percent of people who actually vape at this moment in time, young people who vape, have never smoked. So it is quite a significant rate, and it might be much higher now. We just don't know. Um, what they've also found is that the commonest reason was to give it a try. About 50% of people said, we just want to give it a try. And almost 40% said we wanted to try the different flavors. We like the flavors, and that's the reason why we vape. So if you actually think about the reasons that young people give, it shows that really we're not doing a great job of trying to make it more difficult to use vaping product. We're giving them really good flavors, nice packaging, attractive, enticing, and then saying we also don't want young people to actually go for these products, despite the fact that we're making it very easy and admirable to try and go for this. What they found is that in relation to age of sale, about a quarter of people got their vaping devices from a friend. So it could have been a friend who was older, it could have been an associate, and they got their vaping products from them. Almost 1 in 5, just over 1 in 5 got it from a newsagent. So just walked into a newsagent and just bought it, even though they were clearly underage. Nobody asked them for their age; they just bought it from there. And also, about 1 in 5 got it online. And surprisingly, 1 in 6 actually got it from a supermarket. So they would go to a supermarket, buy a vaping product, they're underage, and they would buy it from there. Despite this, a government report has actually concluded that we're doing a great job in relation to stopping young people from vaping. That's the official line at this moment in time. So you can kind of see that we can't really rely on government to actually do something about it. What we've got to do is take this onus on ourselves as a community and do something about it ourselves. Just for comparison, the adult vaping rate is roughly around 78%. So the youth vaping rates is actually higher than adult vaping rates. Now, if you think about why vaping even exists, the reason for it is actually to help smokers quit smoking. And that means people who are 18 and above who are smoking cigarettes, we want them to stop we should be using vaping products. We can be use vaping products, and there's actually very good evidence to say that it can help people quit smoking. But it doesn't mean that you replace one addiction with another addiction. Even though we know that it's significantly less harmful, what we should be thinking about is just using it temporarily until you can actually be motivated enough here to be able to come off the product altogether. And that's only for smokers. Definitely not for young people, and definitely not for never smokers. So finally, how do we quit? Okay, as I mentioned earlier, the most important thing is that the person themselves has to be completely motivated and committed to quitting smoking. If you can recognize that vaping is not good for you, because any addiction is harmful just by the fact that it's an addiction. So if we want to really think about coming off, we have to actually be completely motivated ourselves. We can't just sort of say, inshallah, I'll do it, inshallah, one day, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants it, then I'll quit. No, it has to be a complete, clear intention from our hearts that we want to quit. A father wants his son to quit, he can't force it on him. He has to be able to persuade his son to actually make that decision, or in this case, persuade his daughter, because many girls are also vaping. What you'll find is that in the previous generation, smoking was exclusively, amongst the Muslim community, smoking was exclusively male dominated. Very few females would smoke. Whereas when it comes to vaping, it's quite common amongst Muslim females as well. So this is also another trend here that we need to be aware of. But like I said, the person themselves has to recognize that it's not good, and they have to want to quit themselves. When it comes to coming off vaping, first, it's important to get a little bit mathematical about this. It's important to calculate how many puffs you use on a daily basis. When you calculate that, let's say, for example, in total over a 24-hour period, you use 20 puffs of the vaping product. So you continue using that same vaping product, and what you would do is that over a 10-week period, each day you would carry on using 10% less per week. So what that would mean is that on week one, you would use 90% of what you normally use. So that would be 18 puffs in a 24-hour period. And then the week after, it would be 16 puffs in a 24-hour period. And like that, what you'll do is that your physical dependence will be removed. That is a guarantee for physical dependence removal. You will not want to crave that vape, unless there's also a very strong psychological dependence. But giving yourself 10 weeks and using all the other measures that we'll come to in a moment will actually get that psychological dependence off as well. Now, if you want to, and you are really, really motivated, it is possible, because of the fact that you're not going to be vaping during your fast, and you're fasting for most of the day for a very long part of that 24-hour period, and you're only concentrating your vaping in a very short period that you have between iftar and suhoor, then in that case, you could actually do an accelerated program where you would do a 10% reduction per day. If you're very motivated, it is possible before Eid, you can quit vaping altogether and not go back to it. But you have to be really motivated here to be able to do that. But the 10-week plan generally works here for most addictions. Next, good company. Like I mentioned, the commonest reason how a young person gets hold of a vape is from their friend. They see somebody else doing it, maybe an older brother, maybe an older friend, or maybe just somebody from school. If that's the commonest reason, it's really important here to keep good company. And that good company, you can choose your friends in a way that you can actually just make a decision, make it transactional. If you see your friend as somebody who influences you in a way that makes you want to vape, then that's probably someone that you need to keep away from until that person quits vaping themselves or changes their behavior. Now, if you find that you've got a collection of maybe about 10 to 15 friends, and of those, about 5 or 6 of them vape, but then they all mix and match with each other, and they're always together, then it's probably better to remove yourself from that entire friends group just until you're strong enough yet to be able to completely come off vaping and never go back to it. It's really important, because company is what really generally tends to influence you in that way. And also social media, it's important to try and keep yourself away from the type of social media that really influences you in attracting you towards vaping products. If you have a single individual that you can respect, maybe your father, maybe an older brother, maybe an alim, maybe the imam sahib, anybody that you can actually go to where you can actually talk to them about this addiction and try and get them to mentor you through that period, then that could be really helpful as well. And that comes on to step number 4, which is friends and family support. Make sure you let your good friends know and also your family members know what you're trying to do and what you're trying to achieve, so that they can support you. And if there's more than one person in the family who vape, then you can work together and try and quit together. And that is something that I found when it comes to addiction. There have been many, many people, when they come on their own to see me, then generally it's usually a kind of, quit short term, relapse, then quit again, short term, relapse, and it keeps happening, this vicious cycle where the person never stays quit for long. Whereas when you have friends and family support, you find many instances of 6 months, 8 months, where they're able to stay quit. And then, of course, there's something else that happens in their lives which makes them go back. But really, if you've got good friends and family support who really support you throughout this journey, maybe it might take a few months, maybe might take a few years, but really, with that friends and family support, you can really quit for good. And then finally, as I mentioned, we underestimate the power of dua, we underestimate the power of increasing our ibadah, increasing our amal, giving sadaqah. It's really, really important that we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help us on this journey, and we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help and support us. And we also ask on behalf of other people. So if we are the sort of people who are disgusted by the act of vaping, we should be making dua for the people who are currently vaping, because we don't know what they're going through. We don't know. And the only reason why we're able to be in this position, in this strong position where we can stay away from vaping, is by the fadl and mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we have to thank and do shukr to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that we're staying away from it, but we also have to try and help and support all those people who are currently addicted to vaping. And with this help and support within the wider community, we can help each other to try and remove vaping generally from our communities, and really set a good example, not just for our own community, but also for the wider population, that if we really work together, we can actually remove vaping from our communities altogether. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all the ability to try and act upon this. I mean,
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم ما بعد قد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم ولا تلقوا بأيديكم إلى التهلكة قال تعالى ولا تبذر تبذيرا إن المبذرين كانوا إخوان الشياطين صدق الله العظيم. I have very little time and obviously want to recite Quran and make dua inshallah before Maghrib, so I'll try and keep it very brief. I'll just give a few pointers in relation to the Islamic perspective on vaping. But to talk about that, let's talk about smoking first of all, just to remind ourselves about some of the harms of smoking. Firstly, smoking causes harm to the body, and the body is an amana and trust from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have to look after it. So much so that actually 2 points I want to mention, which Islam emphasizes so much. One is about good health. Islam emphasizes good health so much that if something impacts upon the body in relation to worship, so worship is recommended and emphasized so much. However, if someone takes it to extremes, that is forbidden, because a person is supposed to look after his body. If a person goes to so much extreme in his worship that it causes harm to his body, he should stop. There should be moderation in worship. If a person is in ill health, he is excused from certain parts and of the is excused in certain parts of his actions. So, for example, the Salah and the fasting. If a person is ill and sick, then the postures change. He doesn't need to stand if he is unable to stand. Some things which are haram can become permissible when this impacts upon health. So if, for example, medicine, if there's no halal medicine available and it's a serious illness, then he is allowed to take haram medicine. So the point being that good health is highly recommended and emphasized in Islam. The other thing is cleanliness. الطهور شطر الإيمان. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions about those people who cleanse themselves and who clean themselves and purify themselves. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves those people. And cleanliness is half of iman, and you have wudu and ghusl, which is a physical as well as a spiritual cleanliness. So Islam emphasizes cleanliness, and Islam emphasizes good health. What do we find with vaping and cigarettes and smoking? Yeah, they are the complete opposite of this. So you have filth and chemicals and so on, which are entering into the body. Yeah. Islam teaches us to clean our mouth with miswak, throughout the day, and it promotes good oral health. Yeah, so the throat and the mouth and the tongue and the teeth, yeah, should be cleansed and clean so that they can be used for the recitation of the Quran, for dhikrullah, and for da'wah. And what happens here? Someone is actively, deliberately, intentionally harming themselves, yeah, through an action of theirs where they're smoking or they're vaping, and these things enter into the body. Yeah. The complete opposite of what Islam teaches us. And not only that, these things harm others. Yeah. So smoking, when a person smokes, he's harming other people. Yeah. So much so that it prevents a person, or it should prevent a person from coming into the masjid. So much so we find in the hadith, mention is made that when certain people had eaten from a tree or from some certain plants, and the smell from their mouth, just the smell. So note this, that what they had eaten was nutritious, was something which was beneficial, but the only problem was it gave off a foul smell. So because of that, yeah, they were prevented from coming into the masjid. It was said, "Falah yaqrabanna masjidana," do not even come close to our masjid. So much so that the Sahaba mentioned that at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if a person was found in the masjid with the smell, with a foul smell, it was commanded and he was taken out from the masjid. So forcibly removed from the masjid, and not just removed from the masjid, he was taken out all the way out to the baqi. Yeah. So imagine, yeah, this is just from the foul smell. So someone who is actually causing harm, where he has and cigarette smell is far worse. Yeah, and not just cigarette smell, even when people vape, you might people often find these smells to be very attractive, right? But for those people who don't like vaping, yeah, these the actual concept of vaping happening in front of a person, yeah, is actually harmful for the people who are there, who are in their presence. And the wealth which is squandered and wasted, yeah, the people who waste their wealth, yeah, in al-mubazzirina kanu ikhwan ash-shayatin, they are the brothers of shaitan. Imagine what a stern warning which is given in the Quran, yeah, for those people who waste their wealth. And all the money that we spend on cigarettes and vaping is a complete waste. Yeah, and not just complete waste, we're actually spending money to harm ourselves. Just imagine. This goes completely against the teachings of Islam. And لا ضرر ولا ضرار, we should not cause harm to oneself or to cause to others. So it's very important to bear that in mind. Now let us compare smoking with vaping. As we mentioned, obviously we know generally, and it's an accepted fact, that vaping is less harmful than smoking. However, just because it's less harmful doesn't mean that it's okay, it's risk free. Yeah. Which is often, unfortunately, the perception that people have. You have major sins, yeah, and the seven mubiqat, yeah, they are the deadly, destructive sins. If someone says, "Oh, stealing is a major sin," but it's not one of those seven, so I can do it. Yeah, it doesn't compute. It's not correct. It's still a major sin and haram. Yeah, just because it doesn't happen to be from the most destructive sins, it doesn't mean that person can do it. Yeah. So likewise, just because vaping is not as harmful as cigarette smoking, yeah, or shisha, it doesn't mean that it's permissible. It doesn't mean that it's okay to do it. And the other thing to bear in mind is that just because something is overall more harmful, it doesn't necessarily mean that the thing which is less harmful, meaning the vaping, is always in every aspect is less harmful. So to finish off, I'm just going to mention a few things, which I'm sure many of you will notice as well, that certain habits that people have when they vape. So vaping is far more accessible to young people, as we mentioned, and vaping products have been made more attractive to youngsters. Yeah, even though it's illegal to sell to under 18s, but it's actually all of the products that you find in the newsagents and the supermarkets and the shops and the corner shops. They're all made for young people. Yeah, and you ask any of the youngsters that are in secondary school. Yeah, many of their friends they vape. Yeah, you'll find vaping products, and that's another bad habit that people have, that vape and smoke. They've got a really bad habit of littering. Yeah, you just find evidence there, just throw it down on the ground. Yeah, whereas Islam teaches cleanliness. And the other thing is that it's everywhere. I find, I mean, we're going back to the 1970s, yeah, when we were many of us were even born, when people used to smoke in their homes, yeah, and now vapors, people who vape, yeah, they just start puffing away right in their own homes, yeah, and you wouldn't see that with people who smoke nowadays, yeah, and smokers, they'll go for their 5 minute 10-minute break, yeah, and go out and smoke and then come back. Vapors, they're just puffing away, puff, 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 and because the cigarette has, you know, a smaller number of puffs and it's finished. Yeah. Whereas the vape and obviously the illegal products, which have supposed to have only 600 puffs or so, right? And some of them have thousands of puffs that are available on one device. So they keep puffing away, puffing away, puffing away, and so much so that some of them even puffing whilst they're in their beds, and they're puffing away and going to sleep. It's everywhere and continuous, yeah, which you don't find with smoking. So it's very dangerous, and because of the nicotine, it's extremely addictive. So much so that came across one individual who was asking that, can I not fast because I'm so addicted to vaping that I feel that I'm going to end up vaping and breaking my fast and I'll have to give kafara. This addiction, any type of addiction, yeah, is extremely destructive and harmful. So it's very important that we're mindful of all of these harms of vaping. Yeah, uh, just because it's less harmful doesn't mean that it's permissible. Yeah, it's still impermissible. Just as smoking is impermissible, vaping is impermissible. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us a true understanding of His deen and give us a tawfiq to act upon what He mentioned, and also to remove all of our bad habits. Wa akhiru da'wana alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.